Westminster Confession, chapter 3, and we're moving on to the topic of God's eternal decree. And this is one of the most important themes in the Westminster Confession, God's sovereignty over his creation, how God has carefully ordered every detail and controls everything that happens within his creation. And this first paragraph in chapter 3 is one of the most profound and beautiful in the whole Westminster Confession. And it talks specifically about how God has foreordained before the foundations of the earth everything that happens in his creation. And this is what it says. God, from all eternity, did by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. So whatever happens in history, whatever the big events on the global scale of what happens with the nations, and whatever happens in the details of each one of our individual lives has been foreordained before God created the world in eternity past. It is a story that God has written. And G.K. Chesterton said that he always believed that we were living in a story. And if there's a story, that means there's a storyteller. And the story that God has written, he wrote before he made the world. He knows everything that would happen. And so that, that's why Jesus says that there's not one sparrow that falls to the ground apart from his Father. Even the details of little creatures like sparrows and when they die and the days that are appointed for them have been appointed by God. And so that's why the psalmist says that the counsel of the Lord stands forever and the thoughts of his heart to all generations. And the book of Ecclesiastes puts it this way: he has made everything beautiful in its time. The story that God is writing is a beautiful story. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Everything that happens, all the times that come, are God's purposes in our lives. Now, you might hear that and you say, wow, we're living a story that God wrote before the foundations of the earth. Does that mean that, we're just characters, we're robots that really have no will or no agency in how God's story plays out? Well, that's not what Westminster says. It goes on, yet, so as thereby neither is God the author of sin. So even though God has written a story that has evil that plays out within it, he is a fountain of goodness. He is writing a good story. It is his creatures who have become evil. This is, the angels that have turned against God, and humans who have rebelled against God are the authors of sin. And then it goes on, it says, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures. So he maintains the integrity of our freedom to act according to our wills and to do what we want. And it's just like, a good novelist will always say that even though they have total control of everything that's happening in their story, they say this character just had to do this. And there's a certain integrity to how their characters play out their parts. And so it's the same with us. In some paradoxical way, God is sovereignly in control of everything, and yet he does no violence to the freedom of our will. So we live in this paradox. But then Westminster goes even farther and says, nor is the liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather established. What does that mean by second causes? Well, God is the first cause of everything. He causes everything to happen because he's foreordained it. And so we're a second cause. So who decided to make this video? Well, Nate decided to make this video. So I'm a second cause. And he says he gives us liberty, and he gives us, he doesn't take away the contingency of being a second cause, but he actually empowers us to have the freedom of our wills. So you think about it, even my choice to make this video, how am I enabled to make that decision? Well, God is all my body is held together by Jesus. All things are held together by God's Son. And he's, the synapses in my brain are firing because he's enabling them to, and he's giving me breath, and he's giving me life, and he's given me all the ideas that I'm sharing, and he's pumping my heart. And every fiber of my being, because God is holding it together, is actually enabling me to have freedom. Because we often think that freedom means, oh, well, God's way off in heaven and he's keeping his hands off of us and just letting us do what we want. No, I can only have freedom if God is intimately close to me and giving me everything that I have that enables me to act. So that's why Jesus says to Pilate, when Pilate is about to have Jesus crucified, he says, you could have no power unless it was given to you from above. Pilate's free choice to have Jesus crucified was a power that was enabled and given to him by God's sovereign power. And so in a mysterious way, God's sovereignty and our freedom are actually one. And this is the beautiful paradox and vision that Westminster gives to us. And so we will see in more detail what it says about God's sovereign control and sovereign appointment of everything that happens in his creation. So now, take this for your discussion. How is the analogy of an author and a novel helpful in understanding God's sovereign control over his creation? Second, in what ways does the author-novel analogy fail to really depict the majesty of who God is?